Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. We're going to be doing another weekly meta-analysis. This is where we do a deep dive into the data of which specializations are starting to dominate, what types of trends are we starting to see. Is there been a resurgence of some specializations that were lagging behind previously? Despite the fact that Blizzard hasn't made any changes, and there isn't any guarantee that they will or won't make changes. And if they do make changes, it might be important to keep an eye on where your specialization is currently sitting, so that you can anticipate whether or not you might be getting a nerf, or you might be getting a buff, or maybe you're just going to stay exactly where you are currently. Now, if you want to stay up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, educational and entertaining content, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. So I'm on the Drustvar website here, looking at their solo shuffle statistics to get an idea of where the specializations are from US and EU, as well as different rating thresholds, so we can determine which specializations are excelling depending on what your goals might be, right? If you're trying to get to 1800 versus 2400, there is likely a significant difference in terms of performance to expect from specializations, and which ones will take a little bit more time under the hood in order to pick up. So let's start with melee DPS. I think it's always important to break and categorize the specializations into their archetypes, because comparing range to melee is just like apples to oranges. It's just not really worth your time to compare those two things. So in the US, we can see at 1800 rating that Ret Paladin still remains the number one specialization, number one talked about specialization. But obviously there are other specializations that are really redonkulous right now, right? It's not all just Ret, even though Ret is getting the highlight and getting the spotlight. It's not all Ret, and I feel like it's kind of masking some of the other specializations that are actually very powerful at the moment. Now, Arms Warrior is coming in at number 2, and it did receive a tiny buff about 2 weeks ago at this point, and I do think those buffs are starting to pay off. I've been spending more time on my Arms Warrior lately, and I've actually been really liking it. I think it's got a tremendous amount of burst damage output that feels like you can control your hits a lot more than Fury, whereas Fury is kind of about building up steam, and if it's hard to stay on your target, especially given that mages are making a big resurgence now, I feel like Fury is kind of losing steam. It's hard to stick on hunters, it's hard to stick on mages and keep your momentum, whereas Arms, you don't connect, doesn't really matter. As long as you get there during your Colossus smash window, you're getting a lot of damage out. So Arms seems to be having a bit of a better time. Demon Hunter, I think, is still, I would have said that Demon Hunter might be debatably the best melee at the moment, even with Ret as good as it is. Maybe not, maybe it's not better than Ret, but I would have said it was the number 2. It's coming in at number 3, even despite that. Unholy DKs, you guys are still riding a high right now. They didn't snip you guys, like they snipped Frost, and we can see Frost starting to move down on the overall trend list here at 1800. But Unholy is actually holding good, and I feel like I would be surprised. I mean, I've talked to Mez on his stream, and he's thinking like the damage is really high and it's messed up, and it's just like, I don't know. Anytime I see an Unholy DK, I'm just like, this seems normal. Like, this seems fine. I feel like Unholy DK should just be left alone relative to a lot of other situations that are going on at the moment. I think for Demon Hunter, it has everything to do with the consumed soul, especially if they fight Warlocks, but even not against Warlocks, there's a lot of healing, a lot of damage amps from using your Purge and then picking up the Demon Soul off the ground. That mechanic in particular seems to be very problematic for Demon Hunter. My issue with Ret Paladins, at least personally, is that you can just lay on hands into Bop into Bubble, and there's like no damage loss for doing that. Just chaining those 3 together just feels like you get this big window of invincibility where you're absolutely smashing people's faces in. I find that to be really frustrating. And maybe Searing Glare needs like more playability. I've seen some ideas tossed around where if you turn your character away from the Paladin, like a PvE fight where they cast like a blind and you can turn your character around to avoid being blinded. Some type of playability like that. Maybe even making it immune to interrupts in exchange for that. So it's immune to kicks, but if you turn your character away, you won't get blinded. This would also help with the fact that Ret Paladins just get to soak kicks for free and do maximum damage, which I think is an issue. So if they just get Searing Glare guaranteed with no, you can't interrupt it, but you can face your character away, it adds more playability to it. It makes it so Ret Paladin isn't as such an easy kind of like interrupt sponge. And then their teammates can do basically whatever they want at that point, while the Ret just continues to rampage at max damage. Some type of interaction there I think would be appropriate. I think its damage needs to be pretty close to where it is for Ret to obviously be viable without Mortal Strike, but there's other mechanics that I think are causing a bit more of an issue. Fury Warrior is still holding in a solid spot even despite that, but I think it is starting to trend down a bit. Assassination Rogue, this one I think is about kind of mid-range representation, but at the lower end of the ladder, I think this is still solid representation, because rogues in general at this rating threshold are usually all at the bottom because they're harder to play. But Assassination does really good damage. This is what I mean by it's like It's not just Rhett. Like literally everybody. It's like a Spider-Man meme of everyone's pointing at everyone to get nerfed, because I've seen almost every single class have something really crazy to pull out of their tool bag. And I really like the Cold Blood and Venom build with Fatebound and Assassination Rogue right now. I would like to gear them up. There's so many characters I want to play right now, and it's honestly the gearing up process that's kind of preventing me from just like playing all of them all the time. Kind of just been stuck on whatever I have that's geared at the moment. But Assassination Rogue is one that I would really like to get on more. Survival Hunter, obviously you guys did get nerfed, I think most significantly. I can't believe Marks didn't get nerfed. And then BM seems to just get better and better. And it's like, you guys got nerfed. It's like, what's going on, bro? BM Hunter does the most unhealable sustained damage when it procs Fenrir, and the bleed damage that you get from that, if you get the same timing as a bear or a boar proc, like it's just remarkably high damage. So it's like maybe survival is kind of just in a fair spot now. But BM and Marksman seem to be just like outshining you again, and it's just unfortunate, guys. Like you guys just, I don't know what it is. It's like they keep the little guy down. They keep beating the little guy when he starts to have a chance. It's kind of the same thing with Frost DK. Although I still think it's good. Main thing is that you just can be countered very easily, right? It's Enhance and Frost DK. Your limitations of doing damage significantly in melee range, and then your limitations to basically, if you get disarmed during a specific window of time or CC'd in a specific window of time, you feel like you become kind of useless. Whereas Rhett just has so many ways to go immune to everything if they get CC'd. And they're just ranged all the time. They don't feel that negative impact as much as Enhance or Frost DK. I kind of actually think Enhance might be rising up, though, in terms of the meta. I see more and more of it. And it seems like if you don't CC Ascendance, so they get a lot of Ascendance procs, they just do unhealable damage. Windwalker, just kind of middle of the pack. Again, this is a spec that I wouldn't expect to get buffed or nerfed, which is probably good for you, because you're just riding it out in the middle where you can't make a performance on it. But main limitation for this one is you don't have the mobility of the Rhett and the ranged reach, and you just don't have the stun lock of like a warrior or a rogue to compensate for being, hard locked in melee range like you are. Although I have seen like some crackle builds and things like that starting to pop up with Windwalker. You're kind of just like, all right. Subtlety Rogue, when it comes to shuffle, I think is notably weaker, but Battleground Blitz, you're one of the best specs. You can easily carry games, and I've got a tier list on that going over all the best specializations in Battleground Blitz. And Subtlety Rogue seems like they're trying more and more to take away like Shadow Blades damage, and so you're just doing damage all the time. And maybe that trend will continue for you. But the fact that you're so good in Battleground Blitz is like they're in a weird spot where if they give you more constant damage, like you're just even more oppressive in Battleground Blitz. And this kind of leads into the whole of like trying to balance the classes across all of PvP, let alone all of World of Warcraft. You get into the spot where it's like, well, they're weak in this area, but they're strong in that area, so what do? If we buff them to get them better in Shuffle, then they're completely oppressive in Battlegrounds. You have a hard choice in that regard with Subtlety Rogue. Feral Druid, again, this one's one of the hardest melee DPS to play, so I'm not surprised to see its representation lower at the lower rating of the ladder. That's why I'm curious to see when we climb up through the ranks how this improves for you, because I do think it's actually good. I've been playing my Feral Druid, and it feels really good. Main issue for it that I've noticed is just Marksman Hunters just bowl you over. And a lot of the burst moments bowl you over, but your overall damage is easily top notch and can compete. And Cyclone is still really powerful, but it seems like your durability against some of the highest bursts is just very rough. And then Outlaw Rogue, this one I think everyone's been ranking the lowest on their tier list. I think what's funny about it though is that on the ladder it's maybe debatably the weakest spec in Solo Shuffle, but I don't even know necessarily that's true if you play Fatebound. And I kind of want to gear up an Outlaw Rogue, because with AWC starting in October, I do think an Outlaw Rogue is likely going to win the first cup, even though I think it's the weakest ladder spec. And it's just one of those situations. It's kind of like in League of Legends, right, where you have some champions at lower ranks that absolutely are pub stompers, but you'll never see them in a tournament. And then you'll have a character that is played all the time in tournament, but never at low rankings, because it's got this element of skill expression that the other classes don't have. And to me, I think it's good that WoW classes have that diversity. You've got the one spectrum of Ret Paladin and BM where you're just kind of smashing and just pressing your buttons and enjoying your time, and then you have other specs that you can branch out into, especially when it's a spec shared with two other DPS specs that's actually really complicated and has a lot of skill expression for you to develop over time. But I actually kind of think they're going to start ripping out that skill expression based on some of the posts that I've seen for Midnight. I don't necessarily think it's going to be happening on this patch, but I don't know. I like, would you guys like WoW if it was in a place where just every spec was like a Ret or a BM Hunter? I kind of feel like it would just get boring. I would be really concerned. So, but at the same time, I feel like Outlaw, the fact that you need so many add-ons and stuff tracking and you don't know when to roll the bones and stuff, like a lot of stuff needs to be made clearer. But I'm kind of concerned that we're going to be stripping out a a lot of that skill expression. But now let's just take a look as you climb the rankings. So when you jump up to 2100, you can see DK starts to take over and Warrior starts to fall off. And I think this makes more sense as Hunters and Mages have become more prevalent. Just staying on your target becomes more and more difficult. But even Demon Hunter starts to go down a little bit. Feral does start to rise. So that trend starts to be more consistent, at least there. We see about the same representation, except Arm starts to fall off pretty heavily at 2400. I don't know if that's just because people re-rolled and haven't had time to catch up yet. We'll have to kind of wait and see how that plays out. And when we get to 2700, which I believe is the top of the ladder, the Enhancement Shaman starts to make its debut. So even if you were at the bottom, it seems like you still have a chance to be able to climb into the ranks. That's why I say Enhanced might be sleeper. It's just really easily countered. So like in a tournament setting, for example, I don't think you'll see one because it's just, if you know the window and you shut it down and you're coordinated, nothing happen. But in Solo Shuffle, someone's fall asleep at the wheel, doesn't notice the ascendants for 2 seconds, you just get absolutely bowled over. And then 2800, which is only one player, obviously, is a Demon Hunter. So you can definitely climb. Obviously, Rhett has an erroneous representation all throughout. I think it's going to be very similar for Europe when we look at the trend lines for this, although Warrior does seem to hold a little bit of a better spot. Survival Hunter, I wonder if this is being propped up by Bic Mix or not. Sometimes the spec, when you get to this top rankings, is just being padded by literally just one like pro player holding him in the base, and the EU once again greater than NA with more players above 2800, but Survival can still get up there. So Survival is still viable. It's just, I think, for new coming players to the game, they're just trying to cheese out an 1800 really quick. It's probably better to play Marksman or Beast Mastery, but if you want to dedicate the time, obviously Survival can still make it through. When we look at range DPS, Boomkin's still in the top spot, even despite a massive nerf to Dream Burst. Dream Burst is now like 3% of your damage. It was like 10% before. Even despite that, you're still really high. I think it's just Haste is very high, Cyclone is fast, and Star Search hits hard. So you just Incarn Star Search, bam, 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 and Cyclone's really fast. So we saw the same thing happen in Dragonflight in the final season where Boomkin started to become the best. They also do keep buffing stamina, which is something to take into consideration, especially with Demon Hunter, which I didn't mention, which is range from above PP talent. We flap in the air and you start shooting Fel Lances. That thing is remarkable damage because stamina is getting higher and higher. The same deal with Boomkin Bear Form, Frenzied Regen. It applies to everything, right? Shadow Priest, Desperate Prayer, Warlocks, Dark Pact, all this stuff is getting stronger. Beastmaster is picking up since getting the 4 set, and I would say these guys are very close to equally competing, at least on the ladder. Shadow Priest is super sleeper. This is the spec that I actually would recommend that you play during this time because, with the tournament, are they going to make changes? What's happening? Because it's good now, and I think it's unlikely to get any nerfs or buffs, which means it's just going to hold its position while either these guys fall or these guys come up, but it holds its position. So Shadow's a really good pick. It's just invincible. It's just so tanky at the moment. Would really recommend it. But if you're just looking to cheese out an 1800, BM Hunter is always a good go-to. Just does crazy instant damage, just unpreventable instant damage for the most part. Marksman Hunter is really good, man. Oh my god, I got to play it for the first time, and I can't believe I took this long to play it. But the changes in the reworks to where like Explosive Shot gives you an instant Black Arrow, and now Black Arrow applies to your like Arcane shot damage buff, so it hits for like 10 million, and you're just boom, 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 instant, and it's all critting for like 10 million, and you just, oh my god, bro. It's actually wild the amount of damage it does. Now, at the same time, though, it probably won't be played in a tournament for the same reason it is enhanced, because its window is very predictable. Outlaw Rogue is the best spec to just completely remove it from the game. You have Gouge, Kidney Shot, Disarm, Blind if you really need to. You have a tremendous amount of ways that just completely lock down their window to do damage, which is why it's kind of just a pub stomping spec and not so much represented in tournaments. Durability and instant cast, unpreventable damage while being invincible is the most important qualities to have. Whereas it is preventable damage, just harder to prevent it in a coordinated fashion when you're not in voice comps, right? Or your comp doesn't have tools to deal with it. Because in Shuffle, you can get a lobby where no one has Disarm. Marksman Hunter is really happy about that. But in 3v3, if you see a Marksman Hunter, they're going to pick a class that can disarm. And if you can disarm, you're deleted from the game. It's a really good ladder spec, really good at carrying games of Battleground Blitz as well. Destruction Warlock is actually the highest represented spec at 1800. I was expecting Demonology to be higher, but they're very close, right? They're like neck and neck with each other. Warlock is getting more and more durable as they buff stamina, but obviously dealing with like all the hunters and the demon hunters is likely going to be difficult. But bro, Chaos Bolts can get hit really hard. You can definitely carry on Destro right now. Demonology has a really good ramp as well to its peak damage that I've seen so far. Arcane Mage still holds as the #1 mage spec, and I think that the mage specs are the ones that are the most in debate. And I've been spending a lot of time on mage. Got 2400 Frost, been pushing fire. I'm going to try Arcane, and I've been playing all three and seeing like the strengths and the weaknesses. I would say that fire is the highest amount of easy to do damage, but it's the squishiest. Arcane is slightly tankier due to its mobility, I think, mostly. but it's got more kind of like single target burst, but you can be shut down easier. Frost is just really tanky. And it's actually a pretty big strength. You're really tanky, and you're really good in these pet classes that are becoming increasingly more represented, like Ringer Frost and Frost Nova and things like that for pets can be really good. So that's why I think we see Frost starting to uptick more, Fire is starting to uptick more. So we see like pretty significant bump up when it comes to ranged. Ellie is bumping up a bit more. Devivoker, I'm surprised it's not higher, honestly, because it's really good. I don't know if people just don't like the lizard, and I've mentioned this in previous videos. Like, people just not like the lizard skin. Like, if Devivoker was a giant robot Gundam shooting lasers from a laser cannon on its arm and like rockets out of its leg, if it's just a cooler looking visual in fantasy, would more people play it? Because it is absolutely powerful, but people still don't play it. And I wish that there was like a skin to turn yourself into like a robot evoker and look like a Gundam or something like that. Or even if you could just turn the dragon form off and just shoot disintegrate out of your hand, and maybe you temporarily transform into a dragon for like fire breath or something, but you just look like a humanoid more often, and you float with hover and you're just shooting lasers like Iron Man or something. Just something visually cosmetic to change with it, just to see if the participation increases, because it's really good. And that's why it's surprising to see its participation so low. And even AUG, even despite being at the bottom, I feel like this is still a chonky amount of AUGs, because AUG is actually decent at the moment. I would say balance is actually pretty good amongst like almost all the specs are competitive, but they've all got like something that's really OP about them. That's why it's like we're in this weird spot where they do make a change, something comes down too much, then you're probably gonna be disappointed. But let's see how this moves as we move up. So Boomkin starts to fall off, so we get to 2100. BM starts to take over. Arcane starts to rise a bit more. Fire starts to rise a bit more. We see Ellie falling more and more, which is surprising, because I thought Ellie would actually be really dominant after the buffs they made to Earthshock, but Ellie still holds in kind of at the bottom at this point, and BM starts to really become more prevalent as we get to 2400 plus, as we get to 2700 plus, still holding in. But we see Boomkin start to fall off quite heavily, and Fire Mage really takes over. So look how different that is. Fire Mage is on the bottom at 1800, and when we get to 2700, it's almost pushing to the top. When we get to 2800 though, Boomkin takes over. So obviously you can still make it work even in this range when it's concerned with Boomkin, and even Shadow starts to fall off more towards the top end. So there's a lot of variety available between these specializations. Really just depends on your level of difficulty that you want and the level of fulfillment you're gonna get out of actually succeeding with them. I feel like you get more fulfillment out of playing something like a Shadow Priest or a Mage than like a Hunter. But if you just want to get your 1800 rewards or whatever, it's totally up to you. In Europe, very similar deal, except Marks is a little bit higher at the lower rating, and Ellie seems to be performing a bit better in this region relative to the Warlock specs. And as we climb the ranks here, Ellie holds kind of more of the middle of the pack, but we see a very similar trend with Boomkin and Hunter, and Fire Mage once again starts rising. Fire Mage is really rising. So definitely, yeah. So Fire Mage number one in Europe. Fire Mage is really rising up. But it's cool to see the distinction between both regions. That's why I always think it's cool to review this data and just kind of look through it and see what's going on as far as representation. But yeah, so Boomkin, really good pick. Fire Mage has been rising through the ranks as well. And finally, when we take a look at healers at 1800, Disc has taken the number one, and I think it's the Void Weaver Disc. Everyone's like, oh my god, because when you free cast on Void Weaver Disc, you do more damage than DPS in a lot of cases, which is, I feel like you're probably going to get nerfed. I mean, Mistweaver got like completely cut down when you were doing like even comparable damage. And Mistweaver, I feel like, has been hurting a lot since then. They've had some PvE changes to their talent trees that have left their spec in a weird spot for PvP. But Disc and Shaman, absolutely would recommend them. They're remarkable healers, phenomenal. Disc might have a little bit of a mana issue that Resto Shaman doesn't have, but their throughput is just really high. It seems like a really fun patch. They've got good set bonuses to be playing them. Holy Paladin's a decent pick. I think you can have some mana issues, and you can have issues getting attacked in a lot of cases. And I think having Ret be so good and Holy Ret's energy being bad is also a reason for you kind of falling behind a bit. Holy is still really good, even despite seeing this trade-off with Disc. I think it's still very good, straightforward healer for someone just starting out. I would highly recommend Holy Priest because it's just focused more on straight instant healing. It has a lot of immunities, big recovery. I think it's important when you're a new player trying to get into PvP. Mistweaver is still, at low ratings at least, showing it's better than Restoger and Prezivoker, but Prezivoker, much like Dev, I'm starting to think it's actually really good, and I'm surprised it's on the bottom. Whereas Restoger, I think, makes more sense. I think it's just, it lost a really powerful set bonus, hasn't really been compensated for it. As we climb the ranks, we see Druid does then trade off and move towards the bottom. Shaman starts to take over. Paladin and Holy Priest continue to hold their position until we get to about 2400, where Paladin actually falls off quite heavily. Resto really starts skyrocketing, but you can see, look at Prez. Prez Evoker starts taking over, starts climbing up towards the top. No one's at 2,800. So Prez at 1,800, lowest represented healer, but at 2,700, starts to be really good. Now, I do think it's a healer, unlike Dev, where Dev is just really easy to play. Prez is harder to play than a lot of other healers. It's very punishing, very difficult to keep up with teammates. A lot of kind of positional awareness is required to excel on it. So I do think this trend kind of makes a little bit more sense with it. As far as his representation towards the low end compared to the top end, but it's very fulfilling once you do master. It's a very fun healer. And when we look at Europe between these regions, very similar trend. I mean, it's basically identical, right? At 1,800, Resto Shaman starts taking over. Prez starts to climb. This is very curious with the healers, but Mistweaver actually holds a much more solid position, right? At 2,400. As we move up to 2,700, Prez, look at that, jumps up, takes out. There's not even any shamans. And this is the interesting distinction, I think, between Europe and North America, is that shaman typically is more popular in North America. I think it's the same thing with Shadow Priest. Whereas in Europe, we see other specializations like priest healers, Prez Evoker healers end up being more popular. And it's always cool to compare the regions, because even despite the balance being the same for both, the metas end up bubbling up in different ways. But overall, I think it's still really fun to play the game. And it's cool to see that the meta is actually changing, even regardless of them not making changes. Now, obviously, I do think that they will. I think there's definitely some stuff that is a little bit over the top, but regardless, I think it's still fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown of the meta analysis, and it's got you ready to go here for the next week's reset. Appreciate your guys' support as always, and I will see you in the next one.